Our team will be talking about the United Nations. First, we'll give a brief overview of the United Nations and its main bodies. Then we'll talk more in detail about the General Assembly and the Security Council. And we will finish by discussing what happens when the Security Council fails to accomplish its main function. So, the United Nations is an international organization founded in 1945 after the Second World War for countries to cooperate in achieving peace, stability, and prosperity on a global scale. The UN serves as a platform for international dialogue, collaboration, and collective action. It is currently made up of 193 member states who, thanks to this organization, can gather together, discuss common problems, and find shared solutions that benefit all of humanity. So the United Nations has 6 main bodies, which are the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, the International Court of Justice, and the UN Secretariat, all of which were established under the UN Charter when the organization was founded in 1945. We're going to start talking about the General Assembly, which is the central organ of the United Nations. It is the main deliberative, policymaking, and representative organ of the UN. It is the only organ where all the 193 member states are represented equally, meaning one state, one vote. This equal representation allows multilateral discussion of international issues covered by the UN Charter. Decisions on important questions and such as those on peace and security, admission of new member states, and budgetary matters require a 2/3 majority of the General Assembly, whilst decisions on other matters are decided by a simple majority. The Security Council is in charge of maintaining international peace and security. It has 5 permanent members who have veto power and 10 non-permanent elected members, making it a total of 15 members who each have 1 vote. The permanent members are China, France, Russia, the UK, and the US. Under the UN Charter, Security Council resolutions are binding on all member states. So the Security Council aims to resolve disputes peacefully, but in some cases it can resort to imposing sanctions or even authorizing the use of force to maintain or restore international peace and security. The Economic and Social Council is the principal body for coordination, policy review, policy dialogue, and recommendations on economic, social, and environmental issues, as well as implementation of internationally agreed development goals. It has 54 members elected by the General Assembly, and it is the United Nations central platform for reflection, debate, and innovative thinking on sustainable development. The Trusteeship Council provides international supervision for the 11 trust territories that had been placed under the administration of 7 member states and ensure that adequate steps were taken to prepare these territories for self-government and independence. By 1994, all trust territories had attained self-government or independence, and the Trusteeship Council was suspended of operations the 1st of November of this same year. It dropped the obligation to meet annually and agreed to meet as occasion required, either by their decision or of their president, or even by request of the General Assembly or the Security Council. The International Court of Justice is the principal judicial organ of the UN, and it consists of 15 elected independent judges. All UN states automatically recognize the existence of the court and can call on its services. It has 2 main roles. The first is to decide disputes between states. These are contentious cases. And the second role is to respond to legal questions submitted to it by the General Assembly, the Security Council, or any other UN organs or agencies. These are advisory proceedings. The court settles disputes submitted to it by states in accordance to international law, and it functions in accordance with its statute. The United Nations Secretariat carries out the day-to-day work of the UN as mandated by the General Assembly and the organization's other main organs. The Secretary General is the head of the Secretariat and is a symbol of the organization's ideals and an advocate for all the world's peoples, especially the poor and the vulnerable. The Secretariat is organized along departmental lines, with each department or office having a distinct area of action and responsibility. Offices and departments coordinate with each other to ensure cohesion in the UN's program of work. The UN staff members are recruited internationally and locally and work in duty stations and on peacekeeping missions all around the world. Serving the cause of peace in a violent world is a dangerous occupation. Since the founding of the United Nations, hundreds of brave men and women have given their lives in its service.
Let's go into more detail about the UN General Assembly. So this is the primary policy-making body of the organization, and it is involved in key decisions, such as approving the UN budget. It works through regular sessions. However, there can also be emergency sessions and special sessions. The actual president is Denis Francis. It rotates each year and is elected by the members of the General Assembly. It has 6 main committees. Each member state is entitled to 1 representative on each one of these committees, as well as on any other committee where representation is granted to all member states. According to Rule 100 of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly, member states have the option to appoint advisors, technical experts, or individuals with equivalent status to serve on these committees as well. Let's go into each one of these committees. So the first committee has to do with disarmament and international security. So it deals with disarmament, global challenges, and threats to peace that affect the international community. In addition, it collaborates closely with both the United Nations Disarmament Commission and the Conference on Disarmament that is based in Geneva. Notably, according to Rule 58A of the General Assembly Rules of Procedures, it is the only main committee of the General Assembly that receives verbatim records coverage. Some important resolutions that this committee has been involved is Resolution Number 1, which is the inaugural General Assembly resolution titled Establishment of a Commission to Deal with the Problems Raised by the Discovery of Atomic Energy. This was done in 1946. Then we have Resolution 1378, which was the very first General Assembly resolution that was co-sponsored by all member states at that time. The second committee is the one about economic and financial, so it deals with economic growth and economic development. It tackles topics such as macroeconomics policies, financing for development, poverty eradication, or sustainable development. However, it may also discuss matters relating to a group of countries in special situations. The third committee is the one about social, humanitarian, and cultural issues. So, this committee deliberates on matters concerning women's advancement, children's protection, refugee treatment, or indigenous rights. The fourth committee is the one about special, political, and decolonization, and it deals with a variety of topics such as decolonization, atomic radiation, information dissemination, peacekeeping operations, support for Palestinian refugees, the impact of Israeli policies on occupied territories, and lastly, peaceful uses of outer space. The fifth committee is the one about administrative and budgetary, so it deals with handling administrative and budgetary issues for the General Assembly. Using the reports provided by the Fifth Committee, the General Assembly reviews and endorses The budget of the organization as outlined in Chapter 4, Article 17 of the United Nations Charter. The Assembly also reviews and approves financial and budgetary agreements with specialized agencies and offers recommendations to them. Additionally, the Fifth Committee can address urgent issues related to funding a peacekeeping mission sanctioned by the Security Council during any of its meetings. Lastly, the Sixth Committee, which has to do with legal issues. So, it serves as the main venue for discussing legal matters within the General Assembly, and all the United Nations member states have the right to be represented on this key committee. So, how does the General Assembly and the Security Council relate? Well, first of all, through the election of non-permanent members of the Security Council. So, the General Assembly elects the 10 non-permanent members of the Security Council, which strengthens the interaction between both bodies and ensures that the interests of a broader spectrum of countries are represented in decisions of peace and security. Secondly, through appointing the Secretary General on the recommendations of the Security Council. So, in the process of electing the Secretary General of the UN, the Security Council selects its nominee through a secret ballot vote and unanimously recommends their appointment to the General Assembly through an adopted resolution. Thirdly, through accountability. So, the Security Council must submit an annual report to the General Assembly on its activities, allowing the Assembly to monitor and discuss the actions that the Council has done. Thirdly, collaboration on peace and security issues. So, although the Security Council has the primary responsibility for peace and security issues, the General Assembly can also discuss these issues and make recommendations to member states on the Security Council. However, it cannot make recommendations on a dispute or situation that it is already being discussed by the Council. And finally, through recommendations and resolutions, the General Assembly can draw the attention of the Security Council to situations that could threaten world peace. Lastly, the Assembly may also request to the Council to present a report on a particular matter relating to peace and security.
Now, let's see the Security Council. Let's remember that according to the Chapter 5 of the UN Charter, Article 24, its primary responsibility is the maintenance of international peace and security. To achieve this, they can impose economic sanctions, arms embargoes, financial penalties, or bans. They can break diplomatic relations, they can impose blockades, and they can call for collective military action. Now, let's remember that the Security Council has a very unique role in international law. Why? Because of the binding nature of the resolutions to all UN member states. Now, perhaps one of the best examples of a successful Security Council reaction was the Korean War of 1950. The invasion of South Korea by North Korean forces marked a clear violation of the UN Charter Article 2, where all members are required to refrain from the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of another state. South Korea invoked the right to self-defense under customary law and under Article 51, which allows for individual and collective defense until the Security Council intervenes to maintain peace. At first, the Security Council responded by declaring the 82nd resolution, which basically told the North Korean forces to stop and to retreat for South Korean territory. Seeing the North Korean non-compliance, they imposed the 83rd resolution, which called for a collective action, military action in favor of the South Korean forces. With the addition of the Security Council troops, the South Korean forces were able to push the North Korean back, which led to a communist Chinese intervention. Eventually, both sides reached a stalemate, and declared peace, except the two Koreas who are technically still at war to this day. Now, it's important to mention that the Soviet Union, which could have voted vetoed the resolution, was absent from the vote. Why? Because they had been boycotting the Security Council meetings, because they claimed that Taiwan, the Republic of China, was using the permanent member seat of the Popular Chinese Republic, who had won the Chinese Civil War a few years prior. But what happens when this doesn't happen? What happens when the Security Council fails to bring peace and security? Now, there's two types of council failures. We got the veto failure and the lack of enforcement. Now, the veto failure occurs when a permanent member of the council uses its veto power to prevent the council from taking any meaningful action. When this happens, it's the General Assemblies under the Uniting for Peace Resolution of 1950 duty to take responsibility of bringing peace and security. Now, let's see a real-life example. The Suez Crisis of 1956. For a little bit of context, the Egyptian president wanted to nationalize the Suez Canal, which went against British interest in the region. So they secretly met with the French and Israeli government representatives and discussed a secret plan. The plan was that Israel, claiming that there were Palestinian terrorists in the Sinai Peninsula, would invade the peninsula. Egypt, using its right for self-defense, would defend itself with military action. Now, acting as peacekeepers, France and Britain would tell both sides to retreat. Israel would comply, but here's the thing. They would tell the Egyptian forces to retreat left of the Suez Canal, knowing that the Egyptian government would never accept that. Now, claiming non-compliance from the Egyptian government, they would intervene. They would have the right to intervene. And this indeed happened. A few days after the invasion of Egypt, both the Americans and the Soviets were concerned that this could escalate. So they tried passing the 119 resolution, as you can see in the screen, that basically told to end hostilities in the region. However, as it can also be seen in the image, both France and the United Kingdom vetoed the resolution. So now it was the duty of the General Assembly to bring peace, remember? The General Assembly did a lot of international pressure to these three governments, and also, for the first time in history, sent an UN peacekeeping force to the Sinai. This managed to successfully de-escalate the situation, and the three parties retreat. There was also a lot of Soviet and American pressure. Now, the second is the lack of enforcement. It usually comes from the reliance on voluntary troops of the Security Council, limited intervention, and insufficient and political or financial support. Now, let's see a case. Srebrenica, 1995. The Yugoslavian war was going on, and Srebrenica is a city located in the Serbian majority part of Bosnia. Now, under a previous resolution of the Security Council, it was determined that this city is going to be a safe zone for Bosniak refugees. Bosniaks are Bosnian Muslims. The Bosnian Serbs wanted to take this city, and they eventually did. When they did take the city, they did the genocide war crime on the Bosniak refugees. Now, apart from the horrible genocide, why it's a failure? Why did it fail? First of all, there was ineffective UN peacekeeping forces. They were under-equipped, outnumbered, and they had little right of reaction, meaning they really couldn't defend the civilians, only themselves. And even if they could defend the civilians, they still wouldn't get overrun by the Bosnian Serbs military. Also, it can be appreciated the delayed response of the Security Council. As it can be seen in July 12, in 1995, the Council passed Resolution 1004, which told the Bosnian Serbs to stop attacking the city. However, by that time, the genocide had already happened. Now, before I finish, I gotta say that the Security Council is often the center of controversy due to the significant power that the 5 permanent members possess. This can be seen as contradictory to the principle of sovereign equality among nations, as stated in Article 2 in the UN Charter. Furthermore, geopolitical oppositions among the permanent members frequently lead to standstill and sabotage. You got China, you got Russia, you got America. We saw in the Swiss that even American allies don't always work together. Thank you very much.